It's so cute,
Marianne said as we pulled up to the little cottage. We had driven nearly 6 hours to reach the charming small house that sat in a clearing at the end of a long gravel road in the country hills.
Oh, this is just what we need.
My wife said excitedly as I parked our sedan near the front of the cottage and switched off the engine. Marianne is generally bubbly about most things, but I had to give it to her. This place already felt like a perfect location to spend a romantic weekend away. We had booked this place using a popular vacation rental app. Being both rural kids moving to the big city after college, the daily hustle of city life tended to wear us down quickly, so we would treat ourselves to a weekend far away every now and then.
Don't you love it, Colton?
Marianne asked me, not waiting for an answer as she twirled around in her colorful long spring dress like a schoolgirl in the sunshine and green grass. It's all right, I said coyly, getting our bags out of the trunk.
Oh, do we have the keys?
Marianne asked, stopping and looking at me with concern. I smiled. No, but the owner said they would meet. The sound of a car engine approaching cut me off, and I turned to see a late-model Cadillac pulling up the gravel drive in a haze of dust. Marianne walked quickly to stand beside me, waving as the vehicle approached. The Cadillac stopped not far from our vehicle, and the doors opened almost instantly. A well-dressed elderly couple stepped out of the vehicle. They were sprightly and lively, waving and shouting hellos as they came toward us. After brief introductions, we learned the couple were Elizabeth and Anthony Roble, residents of this small county their entire lives and owners of several small properties like this one that they rented out to supplement their retirement income. As the four of us walked toward the front door of the cabin in the warmth of the breezy late spring afternoon, Mrs. Roble asked a question that seemed to be a bit chilly in tone.
You are married, aren't you?
She said, stopping in front of the door. Wow, how old were these two? These are the things they worried about? Yes, ma'am, I said, perhaps a little louder than I needed to. For almost 2 years now. Mrs. Roble visibly relaxed and unlocked the door to the cabin. The door swung open without a squeak, and I could feel the cool air from the air conditioner even from where I was standing. This is your first marriage, son? Mr. Roble asked amiably. Maybe growing up out here made people a little odd when it came to small talk. Yes, sir, I said. We were childhood sweethearts.
That's so lovely to hear these days,
Mrs. Roble said sweetly. Yes, so pure, Mr. Roble said wistfully. It kind of gave me the creeps, but I don't know why. Marianne didn't seem to be bothered.
I guess we're just a few of the lucky ones,
she said, and laughed politely. Mr. and Mrs. Roble both laughed, obviously taking a liking to Marianne.
Lucky indeed,
Mrs. Roble said, laughing. Okay, Beth, let's get out of these kids' hair, Anthony said. I'm sure you two will find everything to your liking. The key is in the door. The hot tub in the back has instructions taped to the side. Our checkout instructions are on that clipboard on the fridge, and you already have our phone number if you need anything.
You'll be staying 3 nights until Monday morning, right?
Mrs. Roble asked.
Yes, ma'am,
said Marianne, looking around and admiring the inside of the quaint cottage, which was decorated in a timeless and comfortable style that was both bright and cozy at the same time.
And may I say, you have a beautiful home here.
Mrs. Roble looked around a bit, almost like she was seeing her cottage for the first time.
Yes, it is, isn't it, dear?
The couple said their goodbyes and left us on the doorstep, standing and waving to them as they reloaded into their old caddy and left back down the gravel road.
They were nice,
Marianne said cheerfully. They're all right, I said. Marianne rolled her eyes at me and smiled in that way that she does when she knows that I'm deliberately being obtuse. After checking out the small cottage, 1 small bedroom, 1 small living room, 1 small kitchen/dining room, and 1 small bathroom and shower, we left briefly to get some groceries at a local market that we had seen on our way in. I guess the locals don't get visitors too often, at least if the stares and hesitant smiles we received constantly were any indication. They seemed both delighted and anxious about our presence, which I thought was weird, but Marianne shrugged off. Back at the little cottage, once the groceries were put away, we decided to explore the grounds for a little while before night fell completely. Hand in hand, we walked in the waning sunlight of the late afternoon, admiring the well-manicured grounds and the sights and smells of the plants and woods surrounding us. A slight fragrance of honeysuckle drifted toward us on the soft evening breeze. In the back of the little house was a roomy round area delineated with large, colorful rocks, inside of which sat a fire pit, several outdoor chairs with bright flowery cushions, and little wooden tables to set a drink or book on a lazy afternoon. Under an awning close to the back door was a modern 6-person hot tub, complete with LED lighting controls and Bluetooth audio. As promised, a small laminated sign was taped to the hot tub with instructions on how to control everything. The sweetly melodic sounds of a country spring night had snuck up on us while we had been walking. The light had faded as we roamed the property until now it was almost completely dark. The near summer temperatures during the day had given way to a slightly cool evening. Marianne put her arms around my waist and pulled me toward her, kissing me gently on the lips.
Let's open the champagne and get naked in the hot tub,
she whispered. I wasn't about to argue. The warm, bubbling water felt wonderful on my skin, my feet lightly brushing my wife's bare thighs under the water as we leaned back against the hot tub facing each other. Slowly changing colors of light pulsed gently from the LEDs under the water, dimly lighting our faces in a soft, romantic glow. Holding a slender glass of ice-cold champagne in one hand, I felt more relaxed than I had in a very long time.
So,
Marianne said in a low tone, her voice barely audible over the sound of the hot tub.
what were you thinking for dinner tonight?
I said, sipping thoughtfully on the champagne in my hand. There was that little barbecue place we saw on the way to the market.
Sounds good.
She said, smiling at me, her beautiful green eyes locked on mine. A moment of awkward silence followed as she continued to stare at me, a slight smile on her lips. What? I finally asked, puzzled but amused. In answer, she slowly rose from the hot tub, stepping out gingerly. She placed her champagne glass on a nearby table and grabbed one of the thick, long towels we had placed there. In one move, she wrapped it around her, never taking her eyes off of me. She began to walk toward the back door into the cottage.
You coming?
She asked, her voice low and sultry. I smiled broadly and quickly stood up. I didn't need a second invitation. Dinner was relaxed and casual, and the barbecue was perfect. We ate more than we intended to, and then took a lazy drive back to our rented little weekend house afterward, holding hands as I drove through miles of dark, beautiful countryside hills under a blanket of twinkling stars. We coasted quietly and slowly up the gravel road nearing the cottage, the headlights of our sedan lighting up the front of the cabin and its array of charming flower beds and potted plants as we approached. Marianne gasped in shock at the same time I noticed it. A huge, burly, dirty-looking man wearing overalls and holding a crowbar was standing near the front door. He had turned to face us as we pulled up, surprised by our quiet approach. Was he trying to break in? The man took off running into the woods to the right of us. "Fuck! What the hell was that?" I exclaimed.
I don't know!
Marianne said, dialing 911 on her cell phone.
Let's just go, baby!
"I think he was trying to rob us," I said. "I don't know if we should..." Marianne screamed. The hideous man was standing at her window, peering in at her on the phone, their faces separated by nothing but tempered glass. He smiled broadly and malevolently, several teeth missing in his wide, mustached mouth. His hair and beard were matted and wiry. "Fuck!" I screamed in shock. I jammed the shifter into reverse, turned my body toward the rear window of our car, and tore backward down the gravel road faster than I should have, praying that I would make it to the main road without hitting a tree that lined the gravel path. As I neared the main road back into town, I looked back briefly toward the cottage. The man was still standing there in the middle of the path, just staring at us. Marianne began talking quickly and excitedly to whoever had answered at the 911 dispatch center she called. I drove to the nearest gas station and sat under the bright lights of safety while we waited for the police to meet us. The sheriff himself, Robert White, a rather rotund but otherwise youthful-looking older man, had shown up and escorted us back to our cottage in the woods. To our surprise, the Robles were there waiting for us, a look of pure concern on their faces. Sheriff White left his patrol car's bright spotlight on, pointed at the home as he took a walk around the perimeter of the cottage with his long, heavy flashlight. Mrs. Roble was fussing over Marianne as if she were her own daughter.
He didn't touch you, dear, did he?
Mrs. Roble asked, seeming to sniff at Marianne like a dog sniffing for strange scents. Marianne didn't seem to notice.
No, we were in the car. Oh, good, dear.
Mrs. Roble said, looking around as if the man might suddenly reappear.
Those are unclean folk,
she said in a disapproving whisper. Now that's enough, Beth, Mr. Roble said gently. Who was that? I asked, directing my question toward Mr. Roble. Hill folk, Mr. Roble said. Hillbillies, if you want to call them that. Been in these parts for as long back as I can remember. He was trying to rob us, I said incredulously. I doubt that, son, said Sheriff White as he came around from the back of the cottage, switching off his flashlight as he did. These are simple folk, you know, probably just curious about the newcomers to our part of town. He didn't break in or take anything. I'm sorry he scared you, but there's really nothing more I can do.
What if he comes back?
Marianne said, still visibly frightened. In answer, the sheriff turned back toward the cottage facing the woods. I jumped as he cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled into the dark night. If y'all are listening, y'all leave these good people alone, you hear? I know you were here, so just stay away if you know what's good for you. The sounds of the night were the only noises we heard in reply. Don't let this scare you off, son, Mr. Roble said. The hill folk are mostly harmless, and they don't like running into our good sheriff here. They tend to keep to themselves.
I sure hope so,
Marianne said. I could tell she was ready to just pack up and bolt.
Don't let it scare you, dear,
Mrs. Roble said in a very matronly voice.
I'll tell you what, how about I have Anthony here knock off tonight's rental fee to make up for it?
Marianne was caught off guard. Oh, you don't have to do... Already done, son, Mr. Roble said. Now you and your wife head on inside, get a good night's sleep, and have a wonderful rest of your weekend here. Marianne looked at me. I shrugged. Go on now, Sheriff White said. I'll have my deputy patrol this area frequently tonight, just in case, but I can guarantee you won't hear a peep out of those silly old hillbillies anymore tonight, okay? I looked at Marianne. She shrugged. We thanked the sheriff and the Robles and went back inside, locking the door behind us and pulling all of the drapes tightly closed. Marianne hugged me tightly. We decided to watch TV on the living room couch as neither of us felt tired after all of the evening's excitement. A selection of satellite TV channels were available, and we settled on an old romantic comedy as we snuggled together under a large, comfortable Afghan that had been neatly laid across the back of the couch when we arrived. Before long, I could hear the slow, deep, rhythmic breathing of Marianne's quiet slumber. Not long after that, I could feel myself drifting off as well. A sense of warm well-being washing over me as my eyes slid closed. I don't know how to explain it, but sometime during the night, I could feel that someone was looking at me. I don't know if it was a sound or a smell or what, but I knew there was someone there. My eyes flew open. I screamed out. There in front of me was the same man from before, dirty and huge with a large belly, greasy skin, oily hair, and a smell that bordered on raw sewage. Marianne awoke from the noise and instantly screamed as well. The huge man's arm shot out quickly and covered Marianne's mouth, muffling her screams. Let her go, I demanded. You're in danger, the man said in a rough bumpkin accent, seemingly unaware of the terror he was causing us. I reached for my phone. The man grabbed it from my hand and crushed it in his huge paw like it was nothing more than an aluminum can. Marianne screamed again. You're in danger, the man said, this time just inches from my face. The smell of a mouth that had not seen a toothbrush in years bathed my nose in its putrid stench.
Leave us alone!
Marianne screamed at the top of her lungs. The man suddenly turned his head, cocked it to one side as if listening to something far off. His eyes went wide and he took off running, out the back door which was already open. Holy fuck, I said. Marianne screamed as a knock sounded on the front door. Sheriff, open up. I jumped up from the couch and ran to the front door, unlocking and throwing it open in one move. Sheriff White was standing at the door. He went out the back, I said. Sheriff White hefted his considerable weight through the front door and out the back door, his flashlight in one hand.
We need to leave, Colton.
Marianne said, her voice low and resolute.
Now.
Yeah, I said. We both hurried to the bedroom and began grabbing our belongings. Thankfully, we hadn't unpacked too much. Shoving any loose item into any bag that we could, we had our roller bags ready to go in what seemed like seconds. We began rolling them toward the front door. As we passed the back door, I looked out and could see the sheriff's flashlight shining way off in the distance, deep in the woods. We would just have to catch up with him later. As we came around the corner to the living room, making a beeline to the front door, Marianne screamed. In the doorway was another large, ugly, troll-like man, this one wearing a torn and dirty black t-shirt and jean shorts that were both too tight and too short for something that large and hairy. Its long beard and hair were just as matted and oily looking as the other man's. In one of his large, chunky hands was a long, rusty-looking machete. Marianne screamed again, dropping the handle of her suitcase and backing into me. I instinctively threw my arms around her.
It's almost time, y'all,
the beast of a man said, walking toward us, the machete limp at his side. Leave us alone, I screamed at him. The sheriff is just outside.
I know,
the man screamed, laughing gleefully as he did. He sounded psychotic.
It's almost time. It's almost time.
The man closed in on us, and Marianne screamed again. As she did, a large, ugly, black and red hole appeared in the man's forehead, and I felt wet, hot drops hit my face as a loud buzzing sound suddenly rang in my ears, overcoming all other sounds. I watched the large hill person fall toward Marianne and myself as if in slow motion, powerless to move. As he collided with us and knocked us backward to the ground, I could faintly see the image of Mrs. Roble holding up a rifle behind the large man, smoke wisping from the barrel. My head hit something extremely hard, and I felt a shot of white-hot pain go through my skull before everything blacked out. Dull, sharp pain throbbed in my temples as I came to. Bright light made the pain worse, and as my eyes focused, I realized that it was sunlight from the windows in the cottage. Someone had reopened the drapes. I was sitting upright on the sofa. My mouth felt ridiculously dry, like it was full of cotton. As my eyes focused properly, I saw Mr. Roble standing nearby, looking at me with concern. I said. Something was preventing me from talking. Had I suffered brain damage? The cotton feeling in my mouth grew stronger until I realized that it was cotton. A rag of some sort had been shoved in my mouth. Why? Had I been bleeding? I moved to remove the rag from my mouth. I couldn't. My mind jumped to full attention. I was tied up. I looked down through the pain of my aching head and could see that my arms were tied behind me and my legs were tied together tightly with rope. I was shirtless. What the hell? I tried to scream out but couldn't. Only muffled sounds came out. Mr. Roble continued to stare at me, nodding his head slightly. I would suggest you stay still, son, he said. The ropes are for your own protection. You took a pretty hard bump on the coffee table there. My own protection? From what? I looked around again. In alarm, I realized that Marianne was not here. Worse, my shirt that had been taken off of me for some reason was resting on the arm of the sofa, blood soaking one part of it. Oh no, my wife. I began pushing against my restraints, trying to scream even though I knew the sound was muffled. Whoa, son, hold on now, Mr. Roble said, approaching me. I continued to flop on the sofa and make noise. Boy, I said shut up, Mr. Roble screamed, surprisingly venomous. I sat still in stunned silence. Thank you, Anthony said, returning to his normal, kind demeanor. Now your wife is just fine. Nothing has happened to her yet that would cause her any kind of danger, okay? I glared at the man with eyes that I hoped showed how angry I was. Now, if I take that rag out of your mouth, would you promise to speak to me calmly? He asked in a reasonable voice. I hesitated, then nodded slowly. Mr. Roble did as promised and gently removed the white cloth from my mouth. Small stains of blood could be seen on it as he did. There, that's better, son, he said, moving into the kitchen. How about a nice cup of tea, Colton? Fuck your tea, Anthony, I said, trying my best to stay calm. I'd like to know why I'm tied up, where my wife is, and, just generally what the ever-loving shit is going on here. Mr. Roble stared at me from the kitchen, his eyebrows raised at my outburst. He said nothing. "You know," I said, calming down a bit, "it's nothing personal. I think you'd feel the same way, sir." Mr. Roble smiled and turned off the stove where he had set a tea kettle a moment earlier. He began walking back toward me slowly. "I'm sorry, Colton," he said. "You're right, I should have explained." I stared at him, waiting. "Now, Sheriff White, called us on the way over to your place last night. His deputy had spotted those savages hanging out around the cottage here and called it in. My wife grabbed her rifle, and when we arrived, seeing that you and Marianne were being threatened with that machete, well, she fired." "Did she kill him?" I asked, seeming to remember a large hole in the man's forehead. "Unfortunately, no. At least not here. He scampered off into the woods screaming, but he was still alive." "How did he survive?" "After that happened," Mr. Roble said, cutting me off, "you hit your head really hard, saw your wife knocked out on the floor, and went into some kind of fugue or rage." I remember blacking out. Did I really go into a rage? As if reading my mind, Mr. Roble continued, "You were growling and screaming and spitting out cuss words left and right. You began beating your head against the wall over there just over and over again, and that's about when Sheriff White came back and grabbed some rope from his trunk. For your own protection, we helped him tie you up and placed you sitting up on the sofa here. You were bleeding from your mouth, so we placed a rag in there to keep you from swallowing all of that or spitting it out all over the place. You were eventually knocked out after you wore yourself out." I took it all in. I guess that could have happened, but "Where's Marianne?" I demanded. Mr. Roble lifted both of his hands in a "don't shoot me" gesture. "She's fine, son," he said. "She was knocked out cold, but otherwise seemed fine, so we simply brought her to the bedroom and let her sleep it off. I was left here to watch over the two of you. That's it." I heard some light stirring coming from the direction of the back door and bedroom. My head still pounding, I didn't turn to look. I figured it was Marianne staring at the sound of my voice. "Ah," Mr. Roble said, looking in the direction of the noise I heard and then quickly approaching me. "Let me get these ropes off of you, son." "Thanks," I mumbled as he quickly untied the ropes around my arms and legs. With the ropes removed, I stood up slowly, gingerly rubbing the areas where the ropes had been abrading my skin. In my peripheral vision, I saw a female shape approaching me. My smile grew wide and I turned, ready to greet my wife. The long, cold barrel of a rifle was pointed in my face. I screamed in surprise. Elizabeth Roble had her gun trained directly at me. She was maybe 6 feet away. My expression fell like the boulder that just landed in my stomach. I looked back at Mr. Roble. He smiled warmly, withdrawing a small pistol from his jacket pocket and pointing it right at me. "Where's my wife?" I demanded. "Where's Marianne?"
Shut up!
Elizabeth spat at me, moving slightly closer so that the end of the rifle was just out of my grasp. I felt something hard press against my back, the barrel of Anthony's gun. "Let's go, son," he said quietly but firmly, pushing harder with the barrel. Elizabeth began walking backward, the rifle still trained on my face. "What did you do to my wife?" I screamed out. A sudden, sharp, intense pain crossed my temple as Anthony pistol-whipped me. "I know you heard Beth told you to shut up, you little shit. Now shut the fuck up." He jabbed me in the back again and forced me to begin walking forward, his wife keeping pace in reverse as she trained the rifle on me. Hot tears began to sting my eyes as I thought about all the horrible things that could have happened to my Marianne and what was in store for me. The senior couple walked me out the back door. Elizabeth followed behind us, staying a few feet back, waiting for me to flee in any direction so she could bring me down with a single shot. The sight must have looked bizarre. 2 well-dressed, active, admittedly youthful-looking senior citizens formerly marching behind a 20-something bare-chested kid in sneakers and jeans off into the woods behind an idyllic little cottage on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. The woods closed in on us, and it became slightly darker. Sunlight only filtered somewhat through the dense branches overhead, giving a chill to the air. I shuddered, feeling cold and exposed. We walked down a path that was barely visible to me, but seemed well known by my captors. Trying to stop the images in my head, I tried as pleasantly as possible to engage the two in conversation. "You know, someone's going to know exactly where to look for us when we go missing," I said. "We booked your cottage online. There's nothing but records pointing to this place, and to both of you. I felt Anthony twist the cold barrel of the pistol further into my back. I winced. Do you really think we're that stupid, boy? He asked. I said nothing. Let's just say your wife checked you out of here on her cell phone hours ago, and that phone is now traveling in your own car on its way to a thick forest off the interstate on the way back to your precious city life. Looks like the two of you decided to leave early for some reason, and something terrible must have happened to you on the way back home. My heart sank. The only reason you would pull a stunt like that on an unsuspecting couple was if you intended to—
Colton!
Marianne's voice, scared and tremulous, echoed forth from the path in front of us. Marianne! I cried out, craning my neck to see where her voice had come from. As we rounded a corner deep in the woods, the path opened up to a large clearing. There, in front of my tear-drenched eyes, against a far, thick tree, was Marianne, her arms tied above her head to the tree, her legs tied at the ankles. She was in a pair of shorts only, her white bra and bare midriff exposed to everyone.
Oh God, Colton! These people are fucking crazy!
She screamed. It was then that I noticed what she meant. At least 15 or 20 other people stood around the clearing, wearing what looked like their Sunday best. All of them were wearing a terrible, hideous animal skull mask of some sort. They were all staring at me, silent as I entered their inner circle. Most were holding what appeared to be party cups. Some were also holding firearms. A thick line of what looked like chalk outlined the entire circle of clearing, and more lines were drawn on the inside of the circle. Elizabeth had broken from her position behind me and strode quickly over to Marianne.
For the last time, I told you to shut up!
She screamed, raising the barrel of her rifle and striking Marianne hard across the skull. My wife's head fell forward, knocked out by the blow. Marianne! I screamed. As I did, I felt an excruciating pain across the back of my head, followed by a burst of bright light, followed by blackness. The sounds of rhythmic chanting faded into my consciousness. Slowly, painfully, I opened my eyes. It seemed like late afternoon now, based on the light in the clearing. It was getting a little darker. I was tied to a tree, hands over my head. I looked over. Marianne was still out cold, tied to the tree next to me. A trickle of blood ran down her temple. Thankfully, I could see she was still breathing. As my eyes opened more fully, I realized that the 20 or so people that I had seen before were all standing close together in a semicircle around Marianne and I. Whatever they were doing, they were taking it very seriously. Mumbly sounding chants, maybe in Latin, were coming from them in a steady, repetitive stream. A man wearing an animal skull mask like the rest of the group stood up from the ground in the middle of the semicircle. In his hands was an ornate silver chalice. Through intense head pain, I looked down as much as I could toward the ground where he had been. Was that a fucking mutilated goat? The man with the chalice moved closer to me, placing his fingers into the cup. A thick, dark red liquid ran down the sides. Goat blood. The man began to shout in a powerful tone as he drew an upside-down crucifix on my bare chest with the goat blood that was still warm. It was Anthony Roble. That son of a—
Righto, omnis daemon vanitatis potens te rogamus, has duas pocras et puras animas pro tua delectatione et fame operimus, vini ad nos Christo.
The crowd chanted together.
Vini ad nos Christo.
Anthony moved over to Marianne, his hand back in the chalice of blood. Across her bare abdomen, he drew the inverted crucifix again, while he chanted loudly again.
Crito omnis daemon vanitatis potens te rogamus, has duas pocras et puras animas pro tua delectatione et fames offerimus, vini ad nos Crito.
Again, the crowd responded.
Vini ad nos Crito.
A female figure wearing a hideous skull mask like the others suddenly appeared at my side, holding a dagger with an ornate, demon-looking face at the top of its handle. Without warning, she dragged the dagger across my bare chest, making what felt like a crescent symbol. I could feel my blood begin to trickle down my body.
Tu veni ad nos.
She yelled out. It was Elizabeth Roble. I should have known.
Veni ad nos Christo.
The crowd responded. I opened my mouth to protest this entire stupid whatever this was.
Say a word, and I'll kill her now, asshole.
She moved away and toward Marianne, who was just beginning to stir. She traced the same mark in her skin with the dagger that she had on me, chanting out loud,
Tu veni ad nos.
Veni ad nos creator.
The crowd responded. Marianne, suddenly awake and aware at the pain of the dagger's blade, immediately screamed at the top of her lungs. Elizabeth backhanded her hard across the face, but said nothing else. The putrid smell of hair and flesh burning suddenly hit my nose. I looked down. These crazy fuckers had built a fire to burn the dead goat. And then they left. One by one, without a word, they formed a single file line, pressing their hands together as if in prayer. Slowly, chanting too low to hear, they made their way back into the thick woods. Marianne continued to scream. No one even flinched. The putrid smoke of the burning wood and goat near our feet made me nearly gag. I tried my restraints. No good. My biceps were burning from being in this position. I felt just as naked and vulnerable as I actually was. I looked over at Marianne. She was crying silently. "I'm sorry, baby," I said. She picked her head up and looked at me. It broke my heart to see, for the first time in my life, the bubbly happiness, her joy for life, drained completely from her body. She looked broken. She said nothing but continued to let large, fat tears roll down her face. I began to cry too. Angry, vengeful tears. I never, ever wanted to see her like this. Never in my life. I strained against my restraints and tried to work the ropes across the tree trunk to hopefully wear them down. Marianne saw what I was doing and began to do the same. Silently, we worked for what seemed like hours against the ropes that bound us. In the end, though, the ropes were too thick, too tight, and too well tied to give us any hope for breaking free. By now, sunset was approaching, and I could see the woods around the clearing growing darker and murkier as the day approached night.
I wish you could hold me,
Marianne said quietly, simply. "Me too, my angel," I said. "Me too." She hung her head down now, perhaps trying to save her energy. It took an awful lot out of a person to be tied in the position we were in. Why was this happening, I wondered. Why us? What did they want, this psychotic group of demon worshippers? Why leave us alone in the woods? Were we just supposed to sit here and rot? Or were they going to come back and finish the job? What was it that they were going to get out of this? As if in answer to my questions, a large rustling sound came from the dark woods directly in front of me. The ground vibrated suddenly in rhythm, like an impossibly large creature was walking toward me.
Holden?
Marianne said in a worried voice. I didn't answer. Couldn't. I could barely see that the trees in the murky distance were moving, not as if from a breeze, but as if from a hurricane. Something was coming toward us, something very large. Gigantic vibrating footfalls echoed through the woods toward us. Suddenly, an inhuman, evil scream rang out through the woods, the sound of a huge, furious beast. Marianne screamed. I felt the restraints on my arms loosening. What the hell? The trees in front of the clearing began to bend as if something inhumanly tall were leaning on them. The vibrations from the footsteps were making my teeth chatter. Marianne screamed again. Then I saw why. Into the clearing, at least 2 stories tall, strode an enormous, hideous beast that I could only describe as unholy. It had large, twisted horns at the top of its enormous, bulbous head. Its mottled green skin seemed to be made up almost entirely of angry, black and red, oozing blisters. It stood on 2 gigantic, fur-covered legs with hooves the size of small cars at the end of each one. Its disgustingly muscular arms ended in hands that could hold an entire person without a problem, its long fingers thin and clawed like a gigantic rooster foot. It screamed out again, a sound with the strength of a small tornado behind it, evil and old, the smell of every sin of mankind on its hot breath that blew my hair backward and made my stomach turn. The restraints on my feet were suddenly pulled away. Marianne let out a noise of surprise. I looked over. Her hands were at her sides now, freed from the ropes. She looked over at me. I could barely see the confused look on her face in the flickering light of the roasting goat by our feet and the quickly approaching darkness of night. The demon creature moved closer to us, banging its hooves deep into the soft, malleable dirt. Without warning, the hill person we had seen on our first night here was suddenly standing in front of me. Marianne screamed, looking from the large, dirty man in overalls back to the huge demon creature, then back again.
"Let's go,"
he said in a thick, flat country accent, as if he dealt with 20-foot-tall demons with the same frequency that he dealt with body lice. He began jogging back toward the woods behind the trees that we had been tied to. Marianne had already run over to me. I grabbed her hand and began running after the man, branches and bushes hitting us from every angle, scratching our bare arms and chests as we ran. In the distance, I heard the terrible beast scream again in fury, but he came no closer. The chalk lines in the dirt, I thought. They were holding the demon captive. Oh, someone was really pissed now. We ran for what seemed like an hour, following the large man in front of us. Now and then, a demon scream arose faintly in the distance, getting further and further away. Finally, we came to a small clearing with several tree stumps set closely together, like little seats awaiting our arrival. The hillman sat down on one immediately, breathing heavily. Marianne and myself flopped down on opposing stumps, trying desperately to catch our breath.
"I'm Peter,"
the man said through heaving breaths. A rustling in the trees behind him startled me. Marianne gasped.
"It's all right,"
Peter said, reaching behind himself. A woman's arm reached out from the shadows of the trees, holding something long and flimsy toward Peter. He grabbed it gently and offered it to Marianne.
"Ma'am,"
he said, obviously trying to avert his eyes.
"Ain't perfectly clean or nothing, but I reckon it'll cover you up good enough."
Marianne shyly took the old blanket from Peter and wrapped it around herself, covering her exposed bra and midsection.
Thank you, Peter,
she said in an embarrassed tone.
"'Tain't nothing,"
he said.
"My wife insists visitors be treated well."
You live out here? I asked, my breath finally becoming steady.
"Yes, sir,"
Peter said.
"Several generations of us been here for as long as anyone can remember, deep in these hills. Don't have no use for the city or any of the evil it come up with, no, sir."
I was acutely aware that there were many others in the woods surrounding us, watching us quietly.
"You'll forgive us if the others don't want to get too close. It's nothing personal,"
Peter said.
"We just like our privacy."
Marianne nodded her head in understanding. You were trying to warn us, I said, realizing suddenly that Marianne and I had completely misread the situation.
"Yes, sir, we try,"
he said. Try?
"Them locals, they using some sort of black magic or something to summon demons straight from hell. They only do it every so many years. We try to warn folks if we notice the funny stuff going on again. Try to scare them away if we can."
the thing was a demon?
Marianne asked.
"Yes, ma'am,"
Peter said.
"Far as we can figure, that thing gives the local folks health and youth and long life, so long as they sacrifice what they call pure souls every so often."
That's why they looked both old and young, I said, mostly to myself.
"They's all in on it,"
he continued.
"all the way to the sheriff. So don't be trying to get smart and go running to the police. They's in on it sure enough."
Thank you for saving us.
Marianne said, tears running down her face.
"Wasn't for you, ma'am,"
Peter said quickly.
"Normally, once that hell beast been called up, we usually don't get in the way, lest it come after our family or something.
So, why?
That lady killed my son Luke,"
he said matter-of-factly.
"Shot him clean in the back of the head while he was trying to protect you."
Oh my God.
Marianne said. That lying bastard! Mr. Roble said your son got away.
"No, sir,"
he said.
"And I ask that you please mind your tongue with our lady folks so close by."
Oh, sorry, I said, embarrassed, looking out with a sheepish grin at the dark woods behind Peter.
I'm so sorry.
Marianne said, and looking at the woods said,
For you and your wife's loss.
"Thank you, ma'am,"
Peter said.
"But like I said, we did what we did for Luke. Figured if we took away that demon's bait, he would be mad as heck and maybe go after the local folks what brought him here from hell.
I sure hope he did, I said. I don't even know how to begin to thank you.
Like I said,
Peter said, standing up now.
we don't much care for city folk, and we like our privacy just fine, thank you.
Sensing his intention, I stood up too. Marianne followed suit.
Best way to thank us is to take on off out of here and forget you ever done seen us.
I said nothing, but nodded my head. I was humbled and embarrassed, and more than a little ready to leave.
I'll walk with you a ways over yonder where you'll find your motor car and your belongings safe and sound. My brother is pretty convincing with making bad folks do the right thing, if you take what I mean.
I nodded. Marianne looked toward the woods around us one more time.
Thank you.
She said sincerely, looking back and forth at the audience she couldn't see.
Thank you all so very, very much.
Peter began to walk off into the woods, and we followed. I put my arm around Marianne, and she pressed close to me as we followed Peter out of the nightmare he and his family had tried so hard to keep us out of. The sounds of the nighttime woods swelled around us, a lullaby of life, night, and simplicity. Nothing had ever sounded so sweet, so alive, or so romantic.